All right, so I wanted to welcome you to now our third lecture, which is part of the academic virtual exchange, the collaborative online interactive learning between the University of Management Technology, Florida International University, and University of the Punjab. So we're very honored today to have Professor Ronald Cox, who is a professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Florida International University. He's written extensively in the areas of US economic policy, international political economy, American foreign policy, and political economy of baseball. His books include Corporate Power, Class and Conflict, and The Crisis of New Globalization, which is part of what he's going to be talking about today. Corporate Power and Globalization, Free Agency and Competitive Balance in Baseball, and sort of the US policy in Central America, just a number of great publications. In addition to that, he has started in 2013 an open access academic journal in the history, history at FIU, focusing on class, race, and corporate power. And I'll put the link to his open access journal in the chat so you guys can download some articles, which are excellent. He's received many teaching awards and teaches a variety of courses at the university, including American foreign policy, international political economy, and corporate power and American politics. He served as director of graduate studies in the political science program from 2008 to 2011. And he was also the associate chair of the Department of Politics and International Relations from 2012 to 2016. And he holds a doctorate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the discipline of political science. So we're very honored to have Professor Cox as our lecturer for today. And I will turn it over to Professor Cox. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Akhtar. It is my honor and my pleasure to be part of this symposium. I'm actually delighted to hear from people here, hear from my colleagues in Pakistan, hear from students in Pakistan pertaining to work that I hope is relevant to a more complete understanding of the global system, the global economy. Of course, a big part of this theme is class conflict and globalization, which speaks directly to what I consider central issues that all of us concerned about social justice should be focused on. Just to give you some glaring indications of why it's significant, the top 1%, the wealthiest 1% of the global economy, have twice as much wealth as 6.9 billion people, according to a recent Oxfam study. If you look at how people are struggling across the world, the vast majority of people live on less than $5.50 a day, which actually better reflects a serious measurement of poverty, as opposed to the World Bank figure, which is much lower, is only about 1/5 of this, which indicates part of the problem that I'm going to speak of, because we have a system of globalized production that has been facilitated by institutions such as the World Bank, such as the International Monetary Fund, such as powerful states like the United States, Western Europe, which has resulted in a globalized system of production that has facilitated the increasing concentration of wealth at the very top of the system, which basically means transnational corporate wealth, transnational corporate power, which are the subjects that I've written about extensively in various books, including my most recent one, which is particularly topical for this short presentation because it looks at global production through global value chains. I prefer global value chains over global supply chains because if you think of supply chains you think of the finished product, you don't necessarily think about the process embedded within the creation of the finished product, which of course is how the value gets extracted from the working class, which is increasingly globalized, to corporations at the very top of the pyramid of production. Many of the corporations that are at the top of the pyramid of production do not produce anything these days. They make their money from ownership of intellectual property rights. They make their money from branding. They make their money from marketing. And they subcontract and contract production to a wide range of entities which are forced to compete with each other at the very bottom of the pyramid for rights to produce within this system. So much of global capitalism, there is very little competition at the top. Big corporations at the top have been buying each other out so that they can acquire the most lucrative aspects associated with global value chains. And they have disaggregated production to make it more decentralized, but the wealth and power is still heavily concentrated at the top of the system. So, of course, this is led in this day and age of global capitalism by the dominant information technology corporations, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook, which I guess now is called Meta, which perhaps is revealing in various ways in terms of their global reach and global impact. You have IT firms that are increasingly crucial, and of course, Amazon, that are increasingly crucial for global economic accumulation because these firms plug into production networks, plug in to transnational corporate value chains in an effort to try to make these value chains more efficient for the corporations that reap the most profit from these value chains. So in order to understand how these value chains operate, it's important to appreciate the shift of production that has occurred in this particular period of globalization. This particular period of globalization has seen a shift in corporate production from the nation state to a transnational corporate platform. It's harder and harder to identify corporations with a single state. Corporate power has transcended state boundaries, but is still very much dependent on state power. Transnational corporations are often interlocked and are often connected to a range of investors who have diverse nationalities. In one of my chapters from my book, I talk about how this plays up in terms of the battle for particular markets that's being waged by big transnational firms. One of the most obvious places that transnational corporations are trying to wage a battle for is China. The competition over China is a competition for access to the Chinese market, for access to China as a low-cost platform for transnational globalization, a pivot point for global finance. And you have a battle between the Chinese state, the US state, various sectors of transnational corporations, some of which are profiting immensely from their position in China, others of which are resentful of restrictions on their ability to fully enter the market, to fully profit from the market. But this is often misconstrued as strictly state competition. But if you look at it as state competition, you miss the fact that transnational corporations actually crisscross both the Chinese state and the US state. There are transnational corporations that already make billions of dollars in China that have close relationships with the Chinese government at various levels that depend on global labor chains, global value chains to extract profits. and they depend on a web of Asian value chains which connect directly to China. And these value chains are increasingly relocating manufacturing from the global north to the global south. The global south is a much more important arena for manufacturing production. But here's the catch. Even though manufacturing production is being relocated in the global south, and workers in the global south are in many cases just as productive as workers in the global north, they're only paid a fraction of what workers in the global north are being paid. In other words, if they're doing similar work, and even if they're doing work that is not similar, if you look at measures of worker productivity is eclipsing worker wages. Economists expect these two things to be synchronized. They expect that workers will be rewarded based on growing productivity with higher wages. But what we're seeing in the global south, and what is increasingly true across the capitalist economy, not just in the global south, but also the global north, is that wages are lagging behind productivity. That's because capital is free to move everywhere. States reward firms that are the most profitable by providing incentives to these firms that in the way of subsidies, in the way of tax breaks, in the way of export processing zones that encourage transnational capital to relocate to various locations. In turn, these corporations don't pay taxes. These corporations get lucrative subsidies. These corporations don't have to guarantee anything to an increasingly global workforce. And that workforce is captive. That workforce has a situation where they're forced to compete with each other for relatively few jobs, and they cannot immigrate the way that capital can immigrate. Capital has a lot of freedom to move where it wants. It's very easy to invest wherever you want to invest. But if you're a global worker, you are relatively confined, which is the great social injustices of our contemporary period. We have to find a way to redress the balance. We have to find a way to unite disparate workers in disparate conditions so that they can secure higher wages, better working conditions, and stop fighting with each other over scraps, and actually be able to identify the firms and the interest that are disproportionately profiting from their misery. And it's urgent that we come up with solutions, because without more collective solutions, without solutions that focus on the organized capacity of workers and the ability of workers to see their connections beyond their borders to other workers and not simply assume that they're in it alone, I think we're going to be trapped in a never-ending cycle of neoliberal capitalist crises, because that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing a system in crises. We're seeing a system in which value chains are unable to keep pace with global demand, where firms are attempting to retrench their value chains, where things are falling apart. We're seeing a climate crisis that threatens civilization because of how production is undertaken for the sake of quick profit. And of course, we're seeing racialized and a genderized division of the workforce that puts a lot of pressure on women. I looked at statistics in Pakistan in preparation for this lecture, and I see so many troubling trends pertaining to the labor of women who are not being compensated for unpaid work and lack any kind of social infrastructure of protection. And their interest as workers has to be considered fundamental to elevate other workers in Pakistan and elsewhere. And when it comes to supply chains or global value chains in Pakistan, we're talking about a focus on textiles, which accounts for most value chain production, but the profits are highly concentrated. And as is typically the case, they offer relatively little benefits for workers who are competing for too few jobs. So with that as an introduction to a very big topic, I'm anxious to actually open it up a bit for questions, comments from the audience. Thanks.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Cox. That was a wonderful introduction, I think, to very important topics, and particularly the perspectives and challenges here in Pakistan. And you talked, in very clear terms about the challenges for workers here, and particularly in not just the textile industry, but agricultural workers and all types of workers who, especially the sort of the outsourcing of production, not just the physical production of materials, but also intellectual production that's outsourced. And again, people are getting paid, pennies on the dollar for doing almost the same work, perhaps actually doing more work for that. So that I really appreciate that. So we'll turn it over now to Professor Gulshan Majeed, who will be the discussant, and she will then talk a bit about her perspective on the topics of class and power, and then from there, then we'll open up for discussion. So to introduce Professor Majeed, she has been working as an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at University of Punjab since 2011. She served as lecturer from 2004 to 2011 in the Department of Political Science. She has an MA in political science and an MPhil from the Government College University in Lahore. She completed her doctorate at the University of the Punjab, and her areas of interest include domestic politics of Pakistan, class and conflict management, international law, and international organization. And she has supervised a number of doctoral students, and her articles range from ethnic politics to national integration, sectarianism, and federalism. And so we're very honored to have Professor Majeed serve as discussant for today's topic, and I will turn it over to Professor Majeed.
Thank you very much, Professor Iqbal, and thank you very much, Professor Cox, for a very important discussion and for a very comprehensive presentation when talking about the class conflict and about the transnational interest blocks which are working, and about the capitalism, and about the worker class, about their conditions, about their wages, and about the productivity or about the production, and about the international financial institution as well, and to highlight about the multinational corporation. So when we are talking about the class conflict and globalization, this is one of the very important topic, because when we talk about the classes or the class conflict, so social classes and class conflict have defined social relations ever since the division of the society into hostile classes, and this division of classes in society, it is on the definitely there are certain bases. So it is on the basis of the exploitation and oppression of one class by another class. So a class conflict is not a new when we are talking about the history. So we can see with the Industrial Revolution, even before the Industrial Revolution, and particularly with the Industrial Revolution, so the class conflict or differences between the classes started to be escalated between when we're talking about the proletariat, we talk about the bourgeoisie class, and conflict was there, crisis was there. So specifically, when today we are talking with the emergence of the concept of the globalization, because a globalization concept, it has been emerged specifically with the end of the Cold War period and with the disintegration process of the USSR, because USA emerged as the sole superpower. So globalization concept, it came on the scene and it started to become popular as well. So this globalized or globalization concept, we can see it has definitely both advantages and disadvantages for both, because when we are talking about the classes or we talk about the class conflict, we can see today there is we can see two types of the north state are there, the south, global south is there, global north is there. So the state of the global north, these are the rich states, industrialized states, and having definitely maximum system capabilities and having maximum resources as well. While on the other hand, when we are talking about the global south states, and these states, they are passing through various developmental phases. The political systems of global south states having certain issues as well. So system capabilities are not at that level as we can see in the global north states. They have developed system having system capabilities as well, but in global south, definitely there are so many issues with the political systems as well. So in the global south, one another very important feature when we're talking about the globalization, we are talking about the advantages, disadvantages, and we talk about the class conflict. One thing we should also be definitely kept in the mind, and that is about the those state presence of those states uh, which were under the colonial powers. So they got independence with the Second World War, or after the Second World War, they got independence, and because they were under the colonial powers, so there so many issues were there with these states. So mostly the newly independent state after Second World War, they were the new states with the old societies and having a number of issues with their systems. So this is also one of our features which we have to keep in mind when we are talking about the states of the global south and we are talking about the state of the global north. Now, when we're talking about the class conflict, because definitely on the one side richest states of the world, on the other side the poorest states of the world, and having a number of issues including, as I have told, about the colonial period and then independence, and then so many issues after the independence, because we can see these are the states of the global south. Today, definitely when we're talking about the China, because Professor Cox has written one of the article. In this article, he has explained about the role of the China, because China is a leading power in global south, and it's going to be considered as an epicenter of different production activities now. Global south states definitely facing certain issues, and the division is there. Classes are there, because now these are the global south states and global north states. So class conflict is there when we are talking about the conflict of the states, conflict of the classes. So class conflict still is there. Name has been changed, and new slogans have been given to the people, and new concepts have been given to the people. But actually, states, richest states, actually they wanted to secure their vested national interest through various concepts, or through introducing various concepts in different, definitely at the global level. So globalization having advantages, our globalization concept also having disadvantages, because when we are talking for the globalization, we can see that this is a concept which is definitely giving interconnectedness, or this is going to, under the globalization, increase interconnectedness and interdependence. is there between the states of the world. So this is one of the very important when we are talking about the globalization, that flow of goods is there, flow of services is there, capital, technologies, cultural interaction is also there. As Professor Cox also have highlighted about the transnational corporations working very effectively in different parts of the world, and even transnational interest blocks sometimes undermining the influence of the citizen, ordinary citizen and working class as well. So globalization is definitely opening a way for the states of the north and for the states of the global south as well. But actually, when we are talking about the advantages of the globalization, interconnectedness is there, it's fine. Interdependence is also there. So open market is there, competition is there. States definitely they can enter into that competition, individual can enter into that competition, corporation can enter into that competition, and they can definitely use their potentials in the international market, and they can win the game over there. But then when we're talking about the certain issues, because when we talk about the global south or states of the global south, they are not thinking that the concept of globalization is a bad concept. But one thing is there, because may they are not ready to accept those challenges which are there with the acceptance of the or implementation process of the concept of globalization. So that's why because there are certain requirements which are there when one state is implementing the concept of the globalization, or definitely going through the or going to have the advantages out of the concept of the globalization. So as I have already explained that developing states having certain issues are related to their system capabilities, and even plus one very important thing, because I'm a Pakistani, so being the Pakistani, I can see my own country since its inception 1947 has been facing certain issues, like ethnic issues are there, issues related to nationalism are there, separatist tendencies are also there. So a number of issues since its birth, this state it has been facing. So polarization, internal polarization is there, which is being faced by the system, and externally definitely security threats are there, because simply I can say Pakistan since its inception has been facing interstate issues and intrastate crisis situation or intrastate conflicting situation. So states, when they are having such type of this situation, so then to expect such states that they are facing the external burden of debts and internal different crises, and then they are effectively implementing the globalization and they are working effectively. When we talk about the I have gone through the article by Professor Cox. It's about the global value chain network. He has used this terminology, and international production sharing in simple words. So international production sharing, it can be possible when states definitely they have infrastructure, they have technology, advanced technology. And today when we are talking about the IT revolution, so the states of the global south, they are facing so many issues in regard of all these the things which has been happened or which are happening under the concept of the globalization. So definitely then classes will be there, because the industrialized states, they're having system capability, and with this system capability, they definitely can have the idea about the needs of their people, not only about the demands of their own people, but also demands of the citizen of the other countries. So demand and supply, they can fulfill because they have capability, or they can do. But when we are talking about the developing countries or the global south countries, then we can see that definitely they also want to participate, but how they can compete because lack of technological advancement is there. IT proper information technology facilities are also not available. We are just depending upon the others. So still these states of the global south, they are in simple words, I will say, in one way or the other way, victim of dependentia is not an interdependence, because economically heavily depending upon the international financial institution. Dictations are coming from the international financial institution at the time of the formation or at the time of the presentation of the budget in the parliament. So we are heavily under the dictations by the external actors in form of definitely international, the donors are there, even the states are also there. So under these circumstances, when states are facing different crises, different issues internally, then also after 9/11, one can see terrorism is also there. So states of the global south, they're also facing terrorism. So definitely developed states, they also have faced, but on a regular basis, the states of the global south, they are facing this problem. So a number of issues are here. Then definitely world would be divided into two classes, because when we are talking about the various societies, we can see middle class, this is shrinking, and middle class definitely very necessary for the survival of the society or for the well-being of the society. Now this class gap, it should be bridged up. How and in what way it can be bridged up? The states of the global south, they should be taken into confidence, because interconnectedness, specifically when we talk about the economy, interconnectedness can give many or a number of benefits to the states of the global south. And then so many issues, like issues related to poverty, issues related to health, issues related to other societal dimensions, these can be resolved with better economic conditions. Because as I mentioned earlier, a number of states of global south, they're also facing certain security issues. So they also spending a huge portion of their budget on the security, or for having a more secure position wherever they are or the states are located. So this is also one of the things, because under the globalization and under the good governance, when we are talking about, so more preference it should be given to the well-being of the humanity. So either it's a working class or it's a capitalist class. So it's a well-being of the humanity. So after the end of the Cold War period, we can see that the most of the states of the north, or the developed states, definitely they are paying attention to make a balance between human security and traditional security. But in case of these states of the global south, we can see still states, they are facing internal crises, they are facing the external crises, certain security issues, the threat perceptions are there. So they are unable, in the presence of certain interstate conflicting situation and intrastate conflicting situation, they are unable to make a balance between traditional security and the human security. So this is also one of the very important hurdle when we are talking about the why do the states of the global south not ready to accept the advantages of the concept of globalization. So a number of things are there, because in the presence of all these hurdles which are there, and when we are talking about the production sharing between states of the global south and the state of the global north, so then again there are so many issues, because state of the global north mostly definitely industrialized states, having proper infrastructure, having technological advancement as well, having strong IT background as well. So with all these things, definitely they can produce extraordinary, as far as quality is concerned, extraordinary products. So these products definitely would have more value in the international market, not only domestically but also globally or externally. Definitely demand of such products would be much more. Now on the other hand, When we are talking about the global South states, definitely they don't have such type of the all infrastructure or all these facilities, because still most of the states of the global South, when we are talking about, they are in the transitional, their system, these are in the transitional phase. So facing certain challenges. So first thing we should be done by the global north or the state of the global north, they have to share their different experiences, or they have to share technology with the state of the global south. They have to provide different IT facilities, because when we talk about the globalization, okay, we are talking about the various brands, we are talking about the McDonald's, we are talking about the all these things definitely we're having, but actually we have to, or the state of the global south have to participate when we are talking about the production process, or they have to share the production process. Only they can share when they are coming up with that strong infrastructure, so they can enhance their quality. Now today what is happening in most of the global south, as Professor Cox also have identified about the problems of the workers, about the wages of the workers. So here we are paying more wages, and definitely more time is being consumed, and then the product which we are definitely having finally is a low quality and not having access in the international market. So where interconnectedness stands under these circumstances? So where, how, and in what way then competition is there in the open market? For having the competition in the open market, so we have to go, and we are need for the cooperation by the developed states, and then definitely the crisis between the classes, it will be de-escalated, and then humanity will be prosperous, and definitely then progress will be there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Majeed. I really appreciate that. Those are a lot of very good points. I think just to summarize, and then perhaps we can have Dr. Cox respond. I think a lot of good, very good points, very interesting points. So I think one of the issues is, how would we, one of the challenges that you have, as you kind of identified earlier, is that the global elite that has enabled corporations to thrive happens also because of elites within these societies. So within Pakistan, that help to perpetuate the inequities. So the question then becomes, how do we deal with that, within sort of nation state sort of systems? The follow-on question would be, how do you get workers across nation states to connect in solidarity? Why would an American worker care about a worker in Pakistan? And how would you get them to get involved, or to be able to find solidarity in terms of dealing with the types of sort of economic and political sort of oppression that takes place through the economic system? And I think another really important point that Professor Majeed brought up, which I think is kind of important, is the technology asymmetry that exists between the global north and the global south. The global north having the majority of the technology, and that really prevents people in the global south from being able to access it and use it to their benefit, particularly proprietary information. So I think in echoing that, I think it's an interesting case study to think about China. That was a very poor society, and that when production moved there, they actually not only used the knowledge they gained in the West through their Chinese citizens coming to the United States and learning and going back to the West and going back, but also the corporations that came, they learned from that. And then they were able to then use that technology, develop their own economy and society as well. So there are a lot of very interesting topics and ideas that Professor Majeed brought out. If you have any response to any of them, Professor Cox, we welcome that, and then we'll turn over to questions then.
Okay, thank you, Professor Akhtar, and thank you, Professor Majeed, for an excellent presentation. You actually captured quite a few dimensions, which are pretty close to my book in 2019, particularly the North-South dimension of exploitation and oppression, which I think we can capture empirically, pretty dramatically, and pretty effectively, by looking at the fact that the poorest countries in the global south continue to send more money to the global north than they are getting in return. This is because of debt servicing. And there's a recent book that actually captures this pretty well. It's Princeton University Press. It's by Jerome Roos. The book is called Why Not Default, which basically asks the question, what's been different about the last 40 years of structural adjustment when developing countries are actually asked and sort of forced to repay debts that the entire society has to suffer through, even though most of these poor societies, most citizens of these poor societies had nothing to do with the debt buildup. It was a product of colonial power structures. It was a product of rich elite power structures. And yet it's working class people that are being asked to bear the brunt of their nation's debts. So Jerome Roos asked, why don't states in the global south simply default? And his answer raises important questions about the dynamics of north-south power relationships. He argues that one reason Southern countries do not default is because Northern financiers are much more aggressively concentrated and aggressively organized in power blocks and are backed by global institutions, are backed by powerful states. But he says that's not the only explanation for it. The second part of the explanation forces us to look inside the nations of the global south and appreciate the fact that elites within global south countries have become part of the transnational wealthy classes, at least in part. Many elites in the global south support repaying debts because they benefit from the repayment of those debts, because they too are invested in the same credit allocations that would actually disappear if those debts were not repaid. The fact that stock and bond markets have been much more thoroughly transnationalized means that elites in the global south have become much more transnationalized, much richer. So you have pools of wealth that are not confined to the global north, but also exist in the global south. This is a nice transition to Professor Akhtar's question. What do we do from a nation-state perspective to address these imbalances? The fact that there is still wealth coming from the global south that is not returning to the global south is not strictly a north-south issue. It's also an issue of how Northern investment is being facilitated and encouraged by people in the global south that disproportionately benefit. And globalization is occurring on the terms that the elite wanted to occur. So we have to essentially get a hold of that wealth in ways that are constructive for the broader population. One obvious way to do that is through taxation, through progressive taxation, which of course requires a political movement, requires pressure, requires an attention to redistribution, and requires the ability to be able to locate that wealth and redistribute it to people who can use it, whose labor helped to create it. And of course, this is not strictly an issue confined to nation states, but it could start with nation states, because we have to have struggles inside nation states that are fundamentally about the importance of redistribution, the importance of time investment, to reinvestment of profits for a productive system that would better benefit societies. But then, of course, that doesn't address the extent to which this wealth is transnationalized. But we have global value chains to look at as a potential, at least partial solution for addressing inequality, because global value chains link workers across states who are producing a finished product from start to finish across a range of locations. One of the things that educators can do is they can help activists in the global north and global south form alliances between activist organizations and workers to identify the vulnerable aspects of these global value chains. In other words, how do we slow down production or even stop production by cooperation among workers across states, with the goal of forcing a redistribution of profits to wages, which ideally would force workers to confront the fact that they're no longer isolated by their nationality. They're in it together. There's a globalized working class that they work side by side with in the form of immigrant workers, which is crucial to protect the interest of. And there's also a globalized chain of workers that they're connected to through global value chains. So I think these are some projects we can concretely support to try to begin to redress the extreme imbalances in the North-South relationship. And of course, it has to go beyond that. We also have to talk about sharing technology. As Professor Majeed alluded to, you have tremendous technological concentration in the global north. In this case, I'm all about technology theft. That's how the global north did it. That's how the global north corporations got wealthy. And in fact, the way that the global south can overcome serious health crises is to directly confront the power of intellectual property rights, which is nothing more than a gift to monopoly corporations who are allowed to keep patent rights for 20 plus years, which is ridiculous. It does nothing to enhance competition. It does everything to hoard profits and to prevent the dissemination of valuable technology that would allow us to combat health crises. We see it now with COVID-19. We see it now with lack of access to vaccines. We see it previously with the AIDS crisis, where South African activists had to shame Big Pharma into agreeing to share patents at a reasonable cost to help South Africa address a global AIDS epidemic in the late 1990s. A similar kind of movement has emerged now with COVID, but it needs to grow stronger. It needs to focus on the poverty-stricken nations of the global south. And we need to prioritize getting vaccines to people cheaply and quickly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Professor Cox. So we have our first question from Professor Sen. So I don't know if you would like to ask it or I can ask it, either way. But she has a question on what do you think of the applicability of Gandhi's Satyagraha strategy to mitigate the inequitable situation perpetuated by global corporations? So this is sort of Gandhi's idea of passive resistance, if you remember the Salt March in the colonial period. So do you see any applicability to Gandhi's idea of self-sufficiency or non-violence, passive non-violence in the struggle for equality across the world? Yeah. Professor Cox.
Okay, Jess, I have a lot of respect for the history of nonviolence because it's achieved a tremendous amount for humanity. And of course, Gandhi is an obvious reference point for this tradition. but it's also a tradition I'm directly familiar with civil rights struggles in the United States and elsewhere, which is an extremely powerful tool that helped lift an entire people in ways that would probably have been unimaginable without the use of nonviolent strategies, which helped inform the morality, the integrity, the justice of these movements, which I think is incredibly important. We also see an adaptation of this on the West Bank and with Palestinian struggles against the Israeli occupation. So I definitely think we can learn a lot through these struggles, especially when we confront the strategic fact that we're always going to be outgunned. We are always going to be outgunned, but we potentially have the majority of people at our side who we can bring to the streets, who we can inspire in various ways. And I think that's crucial. And I think nonviolence is one very effective way that crosses a number of political traditions, religious traditions, to actually incorporate these aspects of our struggle.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. There was another question. I don't know, Professor Sen, do you have any follow-up question?
No, I just wanted to say that passive resistance and active non-cooperation, both are strategies, powerful tools, not just because of the quality of nonviolence that is ingrained in it, but also to, whenever there is exploitation, there are two parties involved at least. And the one party is the powerful party, and they're motivated by their greed and their sense of power over the situation. And the other party is the exploited party. And yet they have value, for without their functioning, the powerful party would not be able to exercise its power and harvest the gains from that kind of relationship. And the unrecognized and the unrealized value of the exploited party needs to be brought out into the open. And for that, I believe Satyagraha is also, for that reason too, it is a very powerful tool of making everybody aware of the balance that needs to be there between the people yielding power and the people opening themselves out for exploitation. So it is morally valuable, of course. It commands respect and dignity and trial as a tool, but also because it brings balance in the power situation in the corporate world. We all know how the United States likes to exploit talent from underdeveloped countries to motivate its own and to make its own economy excel. However, if instead of asking to be engaged in their industries, the talented people just withdraw for a period of time, maybe the consciousness of balance could be introduced. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sen. So I think we have one more question, and then I will turn it over to Professor Majeed for any final thoughts. One of the questions is regarding nonviolent revolutions, that sometimes pushing towards revolutionary change can also backfire, and it can also create more divisions as well. So I think kind of drawing upon that question, what are some things that you think workers who are trying to organize revolutionary sort of solidarity need to be mindful of as they do that, so that it doesn't sort of turn out, that the revolution itself doesn't turn out to just simply perpetuate in a different way, the same type of power dynamic that existed in the past, just with different people. Because we see that a lot with revolutions, is that the revolution happens, things are supposed to get better, and it's just a new group of people that are oppressing and doing the exact same thing that the other people did. So how do we prevent that from happening in this type of worker solidarity revolution? Professor Cox.
This is a terrific question. I think it's especially urgent that people like myself who consider ourselves socialist, revolutionary socialist, grapple with a history that is less than ideal. We've made a lot of mistakes. Revolutionary movements, when they take power, oftentimes claim to take power in the name of the people, but we've seen plenty of examples where that has not transpired. So I think the process of revolution has got to be thought about in a much more complex and deeper fashion. And one way to think about it is that there are different ways to transform society as opposed to just thinking about it in terms of state power. Because if you take state power and you're just a small percentage of the population, you're not going to have any legitimacy. You're not going to be actually connected to popular struggles, to popular interest, to popular movements, or to popular demands. So I think what has to happen is a kind of multifaceted approach to more fundamental change that links change from the top to change from the bottom. There's a lot of good work that talks about the potential empowerment of civil society through grassroots movements that can include worker cooperatives, where workers take control of production, workers take control of businesses, managed democratically, are given assistance by their own communities, which mutually benefit from particular local projects. This has a rich tradition on the sort of socialist anarchist left and is close to the work of Professor Chris Wright, who wrote a piece on this in my most recent issue of the academic journal that I edit, called Class, Race, and Corporate Power. His piece is called 11 Theses on Revolution, and he incorporates a much broader thought process in terms of how revolution can be achieved effectively. We have to connect what happens at the grassroots, what is happening with indigenous struggles, what is happening with struggles to gain more rights over land, more rights over environmental territory, environmental justice, more rights over participation in broader ecosystems and workplaces, to the idea of incorporating these grassroots strategies into more fundamental strategies for change that actually unite people across these projects.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Cox. So we'll turn it over now to Professor Gulshan Majeed for some concluding thoughts to our session. Professor Majeed.
Thank you very much. So very well said by the Professor Cox about the improvement of the living standards of the worker communities overall in the whole world. So as far as when we're talking about the working class, so definitely one of the things which is very important, that working class, they themselves, the people who are definitely engaged in this activity, they have this awareness that they have certain rights and they have certain processes to put pressure on the relevant governments or authorities to do better for them. So this is one very important thing, because when we talk about the globalization and the interconnectedness, interdependence, and we talk about the IT revolution, So now things are more easy to travel from one place to another place. So in the presence of the competition which is going on between the global north and south, like if you're talking about the China leading global south, so is competition is there related to the ownership and control over high technology processes. Now today we can see who is going to control more, like the markets, and who is going to who are going to have a possession or control or influencing the high technology processes. So in the present of all these, definitely everyone or every individual, because when we are talking about the globalization, so we all are part of that process. So we have to play our role, and we try to get more, if not maximum, but more advantages out of this concept of globalization. Definitely states they have to evolve mechanism, they have to restructure their policies, either the political policies or the economic policies, to gain maximum from this concept or out of the concept of the globalization. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Majeed. I really appreciate that. So we wanted to thank again Professor Cox joining us from Miami, Professor Majeed joining us here from Lahore, University of Management and Technology, University of the Punjab for this collaboration, and particularly all of the participants, all of you who have joined us almost every day this week. And next week we have tomorrow's final lecture is going to be an introduction to Jainism, which is going to be by Samaniji Chaitanya Pragya, who is a Jain nun at Florida International University, and Professor Zohaib Ahmed, who is at the Islamia University in Pawalpur. So that will be tomorrow's lecture, and I hope that you can join us for that. In the meantime, if you have any questions for the professors, you're more than welcome to write to them. And at the end of the session, I'll send a follow-up email end of next week with all of the speakers' information, as well as recordings of each of the lectures. So I hope that you're able to join us tomorrow for Introduction to Jainism. And then next week's lectures are going to be on different, there's going to be one political science on Monday, and then lectures on different topics with regards to religious studies, including Judaism in India, also medieval Islam in South Asia. So we have a lot of great events lined up for you, and I hope that you can join us. Thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Professor Sen. Thank you, Professor Majeed, for your wisdom and sharing with us your thoughts on how to improve the global inequalities in the world today.
Thanks. I appreciate it. This was a terrific discussion. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. Thank you, Professor Majeed. Thank you all for joining us. Take care. Have a great evening.
You too.
Bye.